followed by Robert Taylor.
Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Hamilton, and I am one of 3 co-founders of the group Opt Out Orlando. We have, for the past several years, assisted families who choose to opt their students out of high-stakes testing through test refusal. People come to us for many reasons. They have great students who test poorly. They know the test is a lousy measurement of student gains and growth. They want local control returned to our districts, or they object to the path education policies and laws are taking on our public system. Whatever the reason, it is usually centered around something going wrong with their own child and their child's experience within our accountability system. I thought I knew what I was going to say to all of you today and have prepared a different speech, so please forgive me for reading this one as it was written this morning. My plans changed with a private message I received from a local student last night. I had a local high school senior reach out to me through Opt Out Orlando. He has a 2.9 GPA and has failed FCAT reading. He has been remediated over and over again with no real intervention to help this student. He has taken 2 free shots at the ACT and is missing the mark by 3 points, which would serve as his replacement score. He cannot afford to pay for any more chances. This young man will not graduate unless he is able to produce an acceptable test score on this one test. He's good at math, but has had little opportunity to experience any of the fun classes that his school has offered during his 4 years there. He is brave to share this, and he is doomed without help. He saw me on the news yesterday, and he thinks I'm a fighter. He thinks I can help him. My heart is breaking. There are thousands of students just like this one all over our state. Failing them is not an option. We must have change. We must end the high stakes attached to these tests. We must begin to focus on an assessment system that will evaluate the student based on real work completed in the classroom. We must return autonomy to our trusted teachers and at the same time reevaluate a remediation program that is not working. The added mandates are preventing teaching from happening. Ask reading teachers how many students in this remediation classes don't need to be there. How many have great readers stuck in these classes based only on their failure of one test? This prevents the students that really need the help from getting the focused instruction that would benefit them. Please ask the teachers. Finally, the opt-out movement is not anti-testing. It is not anti-assessment. We want a quality, valid, tried test that measures student gains and growth that will inform instruction. We don't want punitive consequences attached. Opting out is the last resort, and we've tried everything else, from appealing to our local boards to bombarding our state officials with emails and letters. I have 3 sentences left. May I finish?
Of course.
We meet with you and our own reps. We watch a lot of finger pointing going on. We have not thrown our kids on the front lines. Our laws, mandates, and those that created them have done that. The fear-mongering coming out of the Florida Department of Education must stop. We will not be turned away from our task at hand, and neither will the families in our 25 statewide opt-out groups.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton.
You're welcome.
Members, are there any questions? Representative Miller?
Cindy, thanks for taking the time to come visit with us today. I know we've had one brief discussion together, and I see a lot lately in the news. Have we determined whether opting out is a legal or illegal option? I mean, has there been a discussion or a ruling on that?
Pam Stewart, the Commissioner of Education, answered the Senate Education Committee's request for that information. It was released on Monday evening, where she explained to the Senate in a public letter that there is not an option to opt out. And the way that the statute reads is that all districts and students must participate in the state assessment program. In our procedure of test resistance, we are participating. The student sits for the test and does not answer any questions. The system records them as having participated, and they receive a code called an NR2. It's not a score. A score would be a 1 or a 2 or 3 up through 5, but it's an NR2. And that code does not negatively impact a teacher evaluation or a school grade. So we are operating on the premise that our students are participating, and we have documentation from the state from the Florida Department of Education that says answering questions is not mandated by the law.
Any other questions, members? Senator Thompson?
Thank you. Have you looked at the impact that opting out would have on our ability to draw down federal funds? Has that been considered?
Of course, and I think that's why you had Lee County back out of their opt-out, because that impact is going to come from districts opting out of the test, of administering the test. We're not asking the districts to opt out. We're asking them to get out of our way and let us do it until the law changes and the high stakes are removed.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Goodson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With your understanding or your explanation of opting out, do you know how DOT viewed your comments that you just made to us?
I haven't made those comments directly to them publicly, so I would have to request that response from them. Ms. Stewart just submitted her letter to the Senate Education Committee, Subcommittee, and we're waiting for their next meeting to hear what their response is to the letter. So I made a public statement yesterday, but no, sir, I don't know.
Sure, Representative Goodson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you think that the state of Florida's overstepping their boundaries is what's best for your child opposed to what a parent might think is best to theirs?
My personal experience, do you mean?
Yeah, you can answer it personally.
Wait, I'm confused.
Do you
I'm sorry.
think that the state of Florida is saying this is what's best for your child, where a parent doesn't have the right to say what's best for their child?
You mean the right of a parent to guide their student's education?
And say opt out, yes.
Yeah,
guess
I think that a parent should be given the same rights that they're given by the U.S. government to guide their students' education, whether that appears as an opt-in or an opt-out, especially when you're looking at what the damage is doing with the example I gave you today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Thompson?
Thank you. Currently, we are grading teachers and establishing salaries for teachers based on the performance of students on tests. So if a student sits there and does not take the test, how can we legitimately determine whether or not a teacher deserves merit pay or the grade for
Yes,
that
ma'am.
teacher? What
You're referring to are the end-of-course exams. That is what our state, what you came up with to satisfy the race to the top requirement of performance pay. The end-of-course exams are a separate test from the Florida Standards Assessment, which is the FCAT replacement. While we also do not agree that our students should be bearing the burden of performance pay through the end-of-course exams, we are focusing at this time on the Florida Standards Assessment test, which is the FCAT replacement.
Thank you.
Senator Stargell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You were referring to the high stakes and removing the test. What would you have as a suggestion to make sure that the students are learning the content and that we no longer have what was years before social promotion, where they just moved along when they weren't actually meeting the key skills?
Of course, and when we talk high stakes, we're talking about any punitive damage. So when a student is only promoted based on one test score and not on the body of work that they've done throughout the year, what we would like to happen is for all remediation, retention, and diploma promotion decisions to be based on something other than one test. We would like their, whether it happens through a real portfolio. I say real portfolio because there's a big difference between what we think is the definition of portfolio and what the Department of Education and Just Read Florida is providing as portfolio. Did that answer your question?
You are recognized for a series.
Thank you. And I do appreciate that. And having 5 children of my own, I understand what you're
Yes,
saying.
ma'am.
Unfortunately, the trouble is that there's a lot of it's very subjective, and what I may think is an excellent performance, I think all of my children are brilliant, but other people may not think the same. That's why we have to lean more towards a non-subjective measure of achievement, and that's where a test comes in. I appreciate the portfolio model is very difficult because it's going to be based on the subjectivity of a person, whether or not they think that person or that student has achieved. and then it gets really gray, and it gets very difficult to determine did they actually learn the content or not. So we are looking at the whole measure of testing as a whole. The other dilemma too is we say one test, but if you do multiple tests throughout the year, then we get the pushback of too many tests and too many testing days, and it's a hard struggle. So what we're looking for is having quality standards, but then making sure we have the right non-subjective assessment to making sure the students have learned those standards. But I am looking also at the issue of remediation and some of those things to make sure that we are truly remediating the kids that need to be remediated. I appreciate your time here today. It's just help us come up with some solutions of how we can make sure the students are learning the content, but not in such a subjective measure as to a personal opinion on whether or not they've learned the content.
Can I respond?
Yes, ma'am.
Anytime I hear how are we going to know if a student learned what they claim has been learned? I'm always baffled by that, because we hire professionals to tell us that. And I understand where you're coming from, the not wanting to go back, to a system of no accountability. But I think what has happened is a great attack on the teaching profession here. And I think that we have to remember that we put them in the classroom, and parents trust them to give parents that feedback. We do not trust one test. We want to have our teachers included in decisions that are going to either positively or negatively impact the future of our children, and that includes remediation, retention, and diploma decisions. So I encourage all of you to please talk to educators that are on the front lines with our kids.
President Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned a scenario, and I guess my question is this happening? I'm kind of curious when it does happen. So students are being advised to go into the class, sit for the test, but not take the test. Is that
You
present?
talking about the opt-out procedure?
Yeah.
The opt-out procedure, we're not advising anyone. They come to us first. I mean,
Well,
yeah.
either way,
Okay, so
I'm curious. I'm interested to know if that is happening. What happens to the student after that happens? So they sit, they choose not to take the test,
Correct.
and then so is that student then in jeopardy of being held back, or is it just not held against them at all?
There are two high-risk years for both taking the standardized test and for refusing it. Those years are 3rd and 10th grade. In the case of 3rd grade, which is what gets the most media coverage, a student, if they fail the test, are automatically retained without alternative assessment. If they refuse the test, they are automatically retained without alternative assessment. We help people to understand within the state guidelines provided by the DOE as well as our statutes what they can use for alternative assessments. The technical assistance paper for 3rd grade progression that was released in October clearly states that if a parent suspects their student is going to fail the test, which they can then ask for a portfolio to be started that would represent the student. That is allowed by the Department of Education, but they can also take other standardized tests that many in education believe is a more reasonable look at what that student has gained and grown in the course of a year. 10th grade, there are alternative assessments for 10th grade. You can take the SAT or ACT for concordance score to replace the FSA, and you can take the PERT as a replacement to the Algebra 1 requirement for graduation.
Senator.
Let me think about it. Go ahead.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
So it sounds to me from your answer to that question that you're not opposed to a test, you're just opposed to the test that we have, because you're looking to other alternate tests?
We are opposed to the high stakes attached to testing.
And if I may add, I think what she was mentioning was the other test that you could substitute if you haven't passed the FSA or if you haven't passed your Algebra 1 or Biology EOC.
Yes.
You
No,
could.
But if
You-
they don't pass
Under
that
existing
test, they
law.
still don't move to the next grade. So how
In-
is the stakes not shifted to the other tests then?
In the course of, in the example of 3rd grade, when you ask for a portfolio assessment to be done, it's something that is developed or is selected by a teacher under guidelines of the Department of Education. The portfolio should be showing the best work the student has done. Students can fail portfolio. And everyone understands this process from up front before we ever, I mean, we are very transparent. In 10th grade, to use an SAT or ACT concordant score as a replacement for the FCAT or the FSA, you have 4 years to take it. You can start taking that test in 9th grade and use it when you need it. So if you take an SAT or ACT in your first year in high school and you get a concordant score, you can use that if you were to fail or opt out in 10th grade. And you have until you're a senior.
And I'd like to add, just in case there's any confusion, you do go on to the 11th and 12th grade even if you do fail the FSA or EOC for Algebra 1 or Biology.
In 10th grade, but you don't,
Yes.
you have to have it to graduate.
Correct.
It is a graduation requirement.
Representative Eisnagel, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. So you would have no objections whatsoever if we simply said that in addition to the FSA, a child can take the SAT, and if he or she passes it, then they graduate.
That we already have that.
Yeah.
That's not, no, I don't.
Well-
I would completely object to that. I don't want to take it in addition to, we need to get rid of the test that has high stakes attached to it, which is the FSA.
But you're okay with the SAT, that you're okay with the requirement that students get a certain score on the SAT in order to graduate?
At this time, there aren't high stakes attached to taking the SAT. Teacher evaluations aren't based on that. School grades are not based on that. Funding is not based on that. So I'm unclear. Are you asking for it to replace the FSA, or are you saying that I don't object to them taking that instead of?
Go ahead, Representative Eisnagel.
You seem to support the concept of taking the SAT and the ACT instead of the FSA. Is that correct?
What I support is that people are offered the choice in which test they're going to take. What I don't support is all of the high stakes that are attached to the current test that we're going to use.
And that would be the case regardless of whether it's FSA or SAT?
No.
Can I just say something real quick? That already exists. So
Yeah.
you can take the FSA and you don't pass it, you can take the ACT 5 times, and if you get a 19 or above, you meet
Correct.
the requirement.
Which is why I'm trying to understand what the statement, it sounds like you're supportive of using the SAT and the ACT. I'm just trying to understand what your position is on.
The state has already allowed that within the graduation requirement for this year, or for instance, this year's current juniors. They already laid that out in the graduation requirements. We let people know what their options are. So I'm just giving you the facts. If someone does not pass the FSA, or in this case, if we're talking about this year's current 11th graders, if they didn't pass the FCAT last year as a 10th grader, they have an option already to take the SAT or ACT. If they opt out and they don't take it, they have 4 years to pass an SAT or ACT. It's just us giving them all the information. I don't want to say that I want SAT or ACT to necessarily replace the FSA. I think educators need to be involved in what test we're using, and I am a parent and an activist. I'm not an educator.
Representative Sullivan?
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm just trying to track here, so correct me. But in essence, are you basically saying that you just want there to be no tests that high stakes are associated with, that you want there to be no test that teachers pay or school grade or any of these other things are intertwined with?
I want a test that a student takes that's going to inform instruction. That means that it's going to be a tool for the teacher to use. They're going to understand where the growth and the gaps have happened. I want that test. I want a test that is, it's not going to determine that one test. Even if a kid has a 4.0 GPA, the kid's not going to graduate if they don't pass it. Those are the kinds of high stakes that we're looking at. We want authentic assessment. We want assessment that's been developed with educators involved. We would like our students to know exactly where they stand so that when they need help, it's been clearly defined.
Senator Stargell?
Sorry. Are you aware that you do have multiple chances to take the FSA? It's not just one time that it's administered, but if you should not pass it, you do get to take it
Yes, ma'am.
multiple other times twice.
Yes, I know that.
Okay, so I guess from what I can gather from the conversation, you don't like the idea of attaching other things to the test. Again, when I was putting my children in school, I was trying to find the best school in the community to where to attend, where I'd like my kids to, where I wanted to live, what schools I want my kids to go to. So you would rather us not have any ability of knowing which schools are adequately instructing students, whether the kids are passing or not passing, that the public not be able to know that information?
You're asking if I want a test that was given to the students that's going to tell me if the school is a good school or not?
It's not a matter of the test. That's what we have right now is our only ability to be able to assess if students are learning the knowledge. If we don't have some sort of assessment, then it's completely subjective of whether or not you think the student learned the knowledge. So what we've done is we've taken the assessment, and then after we've had the assessment, we use that assessment to determine if the kids in that school are being taught, or we would like them, being taught the standards of the state. It seems as though the high stakes that you're attaching to it is just we're using data that's been provided from an assessment. We met this morning and toured a school this morning, and their take on the school was we just teach the information and the test takes care of itself.
Was that a school here in Orange County?
It actually was this morning, yes. So I guess some of it may be a perception that all of these high stakes are placed on the test, but the test is just merely an assessment of whether or not the student has learned the knowledge.
I think that if you talk to a wider base of teachers here in Orange County, they would disagree with you wholeheartedly. What you are saying is that as long as you teach the standards, everybody's going to do fine on the test. We are anticipating a 70% failure rate on this new test this year. And that is based on information from a fully implemented year from Kentucky, New York, and Utah. 70%. So I don't even know, I don't know how to answer your question in a reasonable way other than to say, look at the states that have already failed at this. The cut scores were bouncing all over the place. We're hearing from the Florida Department of Education, we're not even going to know the test results until a year from now. It could be a winter test release date for test scores. So the teachers that I speak to, and I speak to teachers in the teachers union in my neighborhood schools, and they come to us in droves to tell us what their real life is like. And I just don't hear what you're saying. I'm sorry.
President Gardner.
Yeah, Chairman, I think we're obviously not going to solve all this today.
Right.
But let me sum up a couple things because yesterday the speaker and I participated in a forum where we had some dialogue about this issue. And in the Senate on our side, we've already started, you referenced a letter that President Gates had sent to the commissioner, and we're starting the dialogue. I think in some of your comments, there's really an underlying issue here that I struggle with is defining high stakes, right? When I took the SAT, that was high stakes because I was going to be judged on whether I could get into college or not. When I took my driving test, that was high stakes because I didn't want my parents driving me around anymore. So I think we have to determine what is a measurable goal for everyone. But in our discussions, we've asked our committees to look at all these issues, to look at the preparation to make sure we're ready. But I just would caution this idea that trying to define one test as high stakes and another test not high stakes, life is filled with high stakes. And so we have to be very mindful of where we go. But as the speaker said yesterday publicly, we hear you. And we're open to looking at these issues and trying to get them resolved as best we can. But I do think that at least on the Senate side, the idea that, well, we're not going to have any tests, or we're just going to walk away and not be able to measure a year's worth of gain in how its students is educated, that's not a good starting point for us. But I think over the next month or so, you're going to see a lot of dialogue that address some of these issues, and And that's why we sent the letter that we did to the commissioner, because, we do have some concerns. And, I just would encourage you to continue to visit with us. And let's see if we can come up with some solutions this session. And I'll end with this, because I had not heard anybody say that, and I'm not saying you're advising them, but to have a kid in third grade being told, go in there and sit for the test, but don't do it. That is concerning to me. But that I had not heard that described. But irregardless of that, we're going to take a hard look at this thing, and if we can come up with a solution that everybody could potentially agree with, then I think you'll find a partner in the Senate that's willing to do that.
Thank you,
Chair,
President.
am I able to respond briefly?
Sure, and let's make this the last
Okay,
comment.
okay, that's fine. First of all, I would like to point out that a driving test and an SAT test are choice tests. You choose if you want to drive. The failure of our state tests keeps kids from graduating. That's what we're looking at here. And I have been watching the committee meetings. It's the best TV ever. It's been wonderful. It's the first year we have seen our representatives jump up and say, something's not right here and we need to fix it, and that is very encouraging, and I truly do appreciate that. In regards to third graders, we didn't throw these kids under the bus. That happened when state laws are requiring them to take the test or fail. So for parents, we've reached the point that we're done. We're done asking, we're done begging, and we are at the point of civil disobedience. That's what this is about. We have a large network of parents, and we are all watching, and we're all anxiously waiting, and we thank you for your vigilance here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. We're going to have one more comment from Representative
Thank you,
Goodson.
Mr. Chair. If they opt out, does it cost the state money, or does the state lose money in the testing? Because testing costs money, so it's...
Actually, it costs the state money if they fail. They have to pay for remediation services. They have to pay for another test. But no, sir, it does not.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Hamilton.
you.
And if I could just say a comment, and I appreciate what you're doing. It's great as a teacher to see parents who are involved. I know this is a very controversial issue, and it's a very passionate issue, but I'd also like to mention that as someone who ran for office because of what's happening in education, I'd like to tell you that I feel very reassured by the people that I've been able to work with, both on the House and the Senate side, that you have concerned representatives and senators who care about what's happening in our schools, and they really do want to find solutions, but they also care about how our schools and our children are being taught. So please know that the people that are sitting back here really do care about what's happening in our schools.